It's Saturday, September 6th, the U.S. Open weekend, the women's championship of the U.S. Open, the men's finals tomorrow. Start of the football season. I'm so disappointed in my Dallas Cowboys, but I do have my Baltimore Ravens. It's a lot going on this weekend. But anyhow, we're glad to be back in the house. You know, let me just say this before I introduce my very elegant and reasonable guest. You know, I think America really wants, I don't think there's anybody on the planet that does not want to live in safer neighborhoods, want to reduce crime, want to restore civility to the society, want their children educated. I don't think people care where it comes from, whether it's Trump, whether it's local leaders, whether it's Johnson in Chicago, Westmore in Maryland. People just want people to feel safe in their communities. And there's no question that the president should work with leaders in different states. If he's sending it in the National Guard, that is something that they want. Because I don't think people care anymore about Republican or Democrat, liberal or conservative. They just care about what works. And I think our mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser, that I'm just so very proud of, has shown that despite all the friction and all the bannering and the criticism that she received from the president, now he's praising her because they're on the same page. They do what? Protect the everyday lives of American citizens. The National Guard may not be the answer, but the mayor does agree that they need more law enforcement on the ground. And I just wish that we could come to the kind of consensus where people can live without the threat of violence, walking outside and their car is no longer there, or going to their car and they're beaten to death over their car because people want free things. They want free stuff. Violence has to stop. How do we get to that? I think we all can agree that we can lower the war of words and find a solution. Giuliani showed us how to do it in New York years ago, that you can get this under control. And then you think about this. This Labor Day weekend, Chicago saw more than 50 people shot, adding to a growing wave of violence we see across America's cities. I mean, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Memphis, New Orleans, Philadelphia, San Francisco are facing these similar crises. And it's not just red states, it's blue states. We don't care what color you are, we just want to stop. Where crime dominates headlines and communities, they're desperate for solutions. And so today we ask, what's behind this carnage? Who is responsible? And how do we break this cycle and come together as Americans so Americans like Scott and like Marcus and myself and our guests who live in neighborhoods where we feel safe, and like Michael Lettis, who's founder and president and the CEO of Invest USA, who joins us today, and who's had over 30 years of law enforcement, and A. Scott Bolden, my man, nationally recognized attorney, very balanced, prominent political and legal analyst, but he's a prosecutor. He knows exactly that role. And of course, Raynard Jackson, my main man, president and CEO of Raynard Jackson Associates, and Marcus, a former police officer here with the Capitol Hill Police for almost 10 years. So let me start with you, out of respect, Marcus. You are a former police officer. What do? We take all this rhetoric that we've heard from the president, from these leaders around the country. How do we make it work? Public safety, community safety for everyday Americans.
Well, Armstrong, I think that's and thank you for inviting me on your show. I think that's the question that we're all looking for. But one thing that we can recognize, Armstrong, is that we do have a problem. Even though we may not agree on the solution, or whether it's the National Guard or bringing federal agents into Washington, D.C. right now, we can all agree that we do have a problem. And as I've always known, while I was an officer on the Capitol Hill Police, and when I was a sheriff's deputy, what I've always known was, once you stop the major crimes, everything else kind of trickles down. You know, the minor crimes, people stop doing some of the main things. And, you know, just going back to the broken windows theory, once you clean up all of the blocks and board up all of the houses right here on the block, it stops a lot of minor crimes and major crimes.
Scott?
Yeah, I think we know the solution. because it's worked in other cities, it's worked over time. It's a continuum of care of our community. One is community policing, it's crime prevention as opposed to crime solving. That is, there's $100 million in federal funds that the House and Senate won't pass out that was designated just for the District of Columbia for community policing, public-private partnerships, religious organizations, crime prevention, community organizations, and giving young people an alternative to crime and violence. If they're the least lost and left out, if they're in poor areas, and that's what they are around, if you will. But I must tell you, crime is in every neighborhood. I live in Chevy Chase, D.C. I live in the Palisades, and people's cars get car boosted and stolen, even in those, quote, high rent districts, if you will. And so it's not just more police, it's community police and training them. I welcome federal support for all of these cities, but let's not make it political. Let's put them in red cities and blue cities and coordinate with the leadership and then release those community crime prevention funds so that they can get into giving alternatives to young people so that if they've got a choice between violence and jobs and job training, entrepreneurship training, or working with community organizations to make themselves and their lives better. We haven't talked about family. I know, Armstrong, you're big on family, and I agree with you on this, you know, building a stronger family unit. And so if we can do those things, then we can bring crime down. But the problem is this, whether you're Republican or Democrat, taking care of poor people, preventing crime, making people feel safe, I don't care about the crime numbers. We agree on that too. But it's expensive. It is an expensive proposition. And so in 30 days or so, or next week when the feds have to leave D.C., unless the House acts, how long can you keep them there? I think it costs like $1 million a day or some extravagant number just to have the feds here, even if they're just in a support role. And so when you talk about America feeling safe, how much is America willing to spend to feel safe?
Michael, Scott raises a very interesting point. When the National Guard is no longer here, how do you maintain this level of almost non-existent homicide, car thefts, carjacking, rape, pillaging of communities? How is that done? I know Rudy Giuliani showed us the way in New York, but how do we do it around the rest of the country?
Well, first of all, I think, I love what Scott said. I love what Marcus said. But let's make sure we focus on the topic that we're talking about here, law enforcement from this standpoint. You have had such success in D.C. because we've had what we call a show of force. And the show of force is indicated that we are committed to making sure that there is accountability for your actions. Let's take a look at some of the numbers that we've seen in the past. We had just 4 or 5 years ago, we had roughly 1.4 million sworn officers across the country. In January, we were down to roughly 700,000 officers. That's almost half the force nationwide is gone. You cannot provide effective law enforcement and effective protection to your community with those numbers. So what are we doing? Well, we're doing the right thing now. We're making sure we show our support, which we should have done all along, for our first responders. Take a look at what we ask out of them. We ask them to put their lives on the line. Not very many people are willing to do that, by the way. It takes a very special person to be that committed to wanting his community to succeed, that he's willing to give his life for it. So we don't even recognize that. We don't pay him. Let's just be very blunt. When you average out across the country, yes, there are some high districts where they're paid well, but the vast majority, 80% of law enforcement, have to live almost hand to mouth. That's atrocious in this country. We're talking about putting in the resources. I thought it was interesting, Scott, you raised a very, very valid point. We're willing to put billions, if not trillions of dollars to other countries across the globe to make sure that they're safe, but we're not willing to invest the same for our own people. We have got to come to the realization that it's time to concentrate on America and its citizens first and foremost, and do what is necessary to what the Constitution guarantees. The Constitution, the preamble says we're supposed to provide for the common defense. We're supposed to let Americans feel safe when they walk out to the park or they walk out to the grocery store. That's a fundamental right this Constitution guarantees. So we should be willing to pay for what we have already been promising the American people for 250 years. And that is where we begin to have to dedicate our resources to making sure, first of all, that they're properly paid. Second of all, that they're properly equipped. We've got officers on there. I was amazed at the Minneapolis shooting. If you watch that video, we had the officers I give them great credit. Fantastic response time. They immediately jumped out. The call came out, active shooter. They didn't know if the shooter had already committed suicide or not. They jumped out of those vehicles. If you look at those videos, probably 60 to 70% didn't have active shooter vests. So they're running into a situation when they know good and well that if he's still alive, he has the advantage. That's just horrible in America today. That should have never occurred. And so we got to do that. But we've also got, I love what you said, Scott, we've got to deal with our youth. This is becoming a very problematic issue in this country. Because, you know, if we take away all the crime today, but we don't teach and don't train our young people and don't reach out and, as you said, make them feel like they can be productive members of society, we're going to have the same problem 2 years down the road, even worse. Yeah. And so it can't be one or the other. It has to be a total unified program. And that's what I think sometimes we miss on the Hill. Sometimes I think Washington gets wrapped up into one solution when it's all got to come together. We have to have judicial reform. You're a former prosecutor, you know how frustrating it is to arrest somebody and see them leave before you can get out of the office yourself by filling out the paperwork. Right. We have got to have judicial reform as well, and we've got to make sure that we put all these programs synchronated. And we've got to make sure that they're all happening at the same time. And quite frankly, I haven't seen anybody step forward to do that just yet.
Raynard?
Armstrong, the single biggest thing we can do, if I was president, you asked me to wave a magic wand, until we reconstitute the family unit, all the other things we're talking about, midnight basketball, and we don't need to take care of the poor, Armstrong. We need to create opportunities for the poor to help themselves. Democrats typically, Armstrong, measure success by how many people need government programs. Conservatives measure success by how few people need these government programs. But until we reconstitute the family unit, Armstrong, I challenge your audience to find me one thriving society that has a low crime rate without an intact nuclear family. And until we address that issue, Armstrong, all the other pie in the sky stuff we're talking about will not work.
So Raynard, let me just stay with you. When you compare Chicago with Washington, D.C., Baltimore, and Memphis, do you see the same root cause or unique local issues? Based on what you just said, it's a combo of all the things that you just mentioned.
Well, notice that most of these activities in D.C. and Chicago are by teenage males, black males, who almost without exception, Armstrong, come from single-parent homes. And either the mother is working 3 or 4 jobs to try to, pay her bills for the family, or the mother who is the custodian of the child. In most cases, they are not actively involved in that kid because, Armstrong, you cannot have a female trying to contain and control a 14, 15-year-old teenager male with all this testosterone raging, and there's no male figure, whether it's the father, the basketball coach, or the local track coach. There's got to be a male influence, and preferably in the family unit. And so there are direct parallels between D.C. and Chicago, and all the pathologies are the same. Single-parent households, no father involved in these kids' lives, and no direction and no hope of opportunity for these young teenagers who are committing all these crimes. That's what has to be done to rectify this problem.
Well,
Hold that point,
if I
Scott.
may.
I'm going to take a break.
Please let me have him. Please let me respond.
I will. I'll give him all. He's yours when we come back. We got to take a break. Don't go away. A very thought-provoking conversation today. We'll be back. And I know we're supposed to. So, Scott, I know you want to address Raynard, but before we really get into that, how much responsibility do prosecutors and judges bear when violent offenders, let's say, are quickly released back onto the streets?
Well, that's usually up to the judge. You know, whatever state jurisdiction has no cash bail, if you will, we know studies show that that works, but the discretion of the judge and the prosecutor having the research and the reports on who they're standing up for against in arraignments in local cities and states all around this country is really critical. Most prosecutors will advocate, if you will, for incarceration or bail, especially if it's a violent crime. Now, that works 80% of the time, 90% of the time, until you make one bad judgment and you let that person go, and that person goes out, he's got a long criminal record, but let's say he didn't commit a violent crime. And what he does is he goes out and then he commits a violent crime. And that really is where the system is broken down. The other piece is, I keep talking about the cost, because if you've got large numbers of incarceration, the more arrests you make, the more prosecutions you do, that doesn't necessarily mean that crime, it's got to be part of a crime prevention program, not the crime prevention program. Because we know DC, for example, has the highest incarceration rate, highest arrest rate per capita of any major urban center. That's 500,000 or more. And yet we still have a crime problem and people still don't feel safe. In regard to Raynard, if I may, very quickly, I'd like to see that pathology report, because you've got broad brushes, and the real fantasy here is that that's the lump of people committing crimes. You know, in most communities, 10 to 20% of the bad actors commit 90 to 100% of the crime in those communities. We know who the bad guys are, right? But if you got nowhere to put them, even if you're going to hold them if they keep committing crimes, then the source and that continuum of care that they need, that I've talked about, and we've all agreed that it's more than just police, then that gets tough because you got nowhere to put them. But let me tell you this, what the real fantasy is, the original family unit, mother, father, 2 or 3 kids, okay, we've got to redefine that. I'm sorry, Raynard, that life, that 1950s family organization or structure just isn't there anymore. We're going to have single men and single women having parents. To me, you're going to have gay parents, if you will. You're going to have trans parents. And so to me, it's about value and imparting your value on your kids. I don't care whether it's 1 or 2. I do think young men need a young man in their life for sure. But let me tell you, what kept me out of trouble in Joliet, Illinois, and I ran with some bad actors, if you will. My father was a lawyer and judge. He didn't make a whole lot of money and so forth and so on. In fact, for a long time, he was the only black lawyer in the community, and everybody else worked at the factory, right? So I had no choice but to run with who I grew up with. Let me tell you what stopped me from committing crime. It wasn't the police. I was more afraid of my father than I was of the police. And my brothers and sisters will tell you. And I didn't want to embarrass him, right? And so he was a civil rights lawyer and leader in the civil rights movement. I didn't want to embarrass him, and I wanted to be a lawyer just like him. So I had legitimate goals and dreams, and I always thought if I got arrested, I could never become a lawyer. That's not necessarily true per se, but it would be made more difficult. Our kids who are committing crime need those types of alternatives and those type of men in their life, whoever they may be, to give them an alternative to crime and violence, give them hope, job training, education opportunities, and the possibility or the probability of living their dream, to go to college or to do a trade and what have you. I guarantee you, if young men, wherever they're born, have a reasonable opportunity to be employed and to live a long life versus crime and violence and a short life, I'm pretty sure every one of them, 99%, would choose the former, not the latter.
Scott, let me ask you a question. Let me jump in here real quick. I want to pick a little bone here.
Okay.
Where's the educational system in all this? What are they learning in school? How come the schools have become war zones instead of educational institutions? How come we're not addressing where they spend the majority of their time every day?
Yeah, Michael, you're absolutely right. You're not going to get any pushback. I'll accept that friendly amendment, if you will.
Let me have Raynard address that. Raynard?
Yeah, Scott, I would challenge you, show me one developed society, country, part of the world where a redefined definition of the nuclear family has worked. You cannot point
Working
to
in
one
America.
country.
America's not all bad because we've redefined what family is. But that's what I'm saying is, as a practical matter, Raynard, it'd be great if everybody had a mother and father and 3 kids. I got no problem. And they had a job and they had health care and educational opportunities. But that's just not the reality
But we're
for the
talking about
least, the
crime,
lost,
and
and the
there's a
left out.
direct correlation to the level of crime in a society, to the percentage of marriage in a society, and the constitution
Raynard,
of the family unit.
There are thousands of kids I went to school with at Morehouse and Howard who came from challenged backgrounds, who didn't have a mother and a father of that family unit. And again, I said early on, it's about imparting your values, respect, and how you raise them. And very often, I will concede this to you, very often in many of our communities, we have kids raising kids who haven't even developed the values to impart on young people. And so that is a challenge. But I don't like painting it with a broad brush. Let's not do that.
Michael, let me raise this with you. Do political leaders sometimes use crime as a political tool rather than addressing it as a public safety emergency?
I think there's no question about that, Armstrong. Politicians will use anything they think go get a vote and get $1. I mean, that's just to be understood. But it doesn't give us the right to sideline and to not address the issues as the citizens of this great country. And again, on the educational issue, I think education is a key part, but I think what's missing in all this factor is where's the accountability? And I'm not just going after young people now. I'm going after society, period. Mm-hmm. Do we have a society now that thinks I can get away with anything anytime I want to? I don't have to be accountable for it. Mm-hmm. That's what seems to be happening on the streets, and that's what makes it tough being a cop on the street, is we don't seem to see accountability being taken seriously.
What has changed? What has changed for law enforcement over the last 20 or 30 years? There's something that's changed. You did not see this level of violence among young people. Of course, the breakdown of family has been coming about for some time. What does it need to go back to? Especially, how does the police morale and retention affect the ability to fight the kind of crime that in these cities? I'm talking to Michael and to Marcus now.
Armstrong, if I may.
Go ahead,
Scott and Raynard, while bringing back the nuclear family is a great point, and it's a root point, but from the law enforcement perspective, I think the great change occurred that I saw was around 2020, 2019, 2020, when the whole defund the police movement began. And with that said, you had those bad actors, that 10 to 20% of law enforcement also of any population committing these offenses, and it represented the entire community of law enforcement, which was a travesty within itself. However, the effect of that is you have law enforcement officers who then say, you know what, my hands are tied. If I do the slightest thing, if I make a mistake in the slightest way, I'm going to be prosecuted and my family won't be able to eat tomorrow. I won't be able to provide for my family. And so with that said, you have a lot of law enforcement officers who are scared to do their job. And that's the worst officer to have out here. So that's the biggest change that I've seen in law enforcement. And I think, again, that occurred over the past 5 years.
Michael, should lawmakers focus on stricter gun control measures or on better enforcing the laws already in place?
The law's already in place. I take this position, Mark Armstrong. I've never seen a gun shoot itself. Never have, never will. Quite frankly, it's the people that use the guns that cause the issue. And we get back to what Marcus was just saying. You know, we talk about defund the police. It translates into a little bigger issue, Marcus, as far as I'm concerned. There's been a lack of respect. There is absolutely no respect for authority because there's no respect for accountability. And so if there's no respect for authority, then I don't care what kind of job you're in my way. I'm going to push you out of the way if you continue to get in my way. That's the attitude we have out there now, and that's what we need to be wrestling with and dealing with.
Yeah, but Armstrong, if I may, Michael, the police are not without fault here now. Now, there are enough bad actors on police forces around this country, not all, if you will, but see, I take a hardcore view of bad actors in the police force. If you're a bad actor, you don't need to be in the police force. I think
everybody agrees.
If you know, I'm going to go a little further. If you know that you're working with bad actors and you don't speak up or report them vis-a-vis within the thin blue line, and I get the blue line, as you know, I'm a former prosecutor, then you are just as responsible if there is a bad accident or an intentional piece in regard to bad police conduct. Listen, no one wants to defund the police. I think in Minneapolis maybe is maybe one of 3 or 4 communities that defunded the police because of the far left, right? If you polled most people of color, most people in most urban centers, They don't want to defund the police. They just want better policing. They want better trained police officers. They don't want a us versus them mentality that develops in New York. The police officers in the 80s and 90s would come into the criminal complaint room and talk about people they arrested, mostly black and brown people, and in drawing up the complaint, they would talk about the arrestee as a mope, a perp, a dog, an animal. Now, they're going to refer to the people they arrest. These are human beings like that among prosecutors and their fellow police officers. How the hell are they going to act out on the street if they have an us versus them and they're calling them out of the name? Because that's how they view these bad actors. Many of them poor, many of the least lost and left out. We got to get rid of that mentality and redefine and ensure that our police officers are 100% following the law. Giuliani fixed the crime problem, but my problem with Giuliani was he violated a lot of rights of individuals, which is why he was no longer mayor, but also the redefining that piece in New York, because there were several lawsuits, if you will.
So let me get this in with Michael, because I know I'm coming up on time here. How did this play out? The president wanting to have the National Guard in Baltimore, have it in Chicago. How should this work? How should they all work together to make this work for everyone, Michael, from your experience?
I think when you talk about this particular issue with the Guard, I think it's essential that we bring the Guard in.
Oh, really?
And here's why. Our numbers are down so low, we're not capable of cleaning it up the way we should. No, the Guard is not a permanent solution. Never has been proposed as a permanent solution. We need the Guard to help side-by-side partner till we can get the crime under control and get our numbers back up where they need to be and have the respect in the community through education that needs to be there, and then the Guard can go away.
Raynard?
Armstrong, I'm going to go back to my original premise. Because of the lack of a male presence in the family house, you got parents now, when they see their kid in front of the house engaging with the police, the parents' default position is the police is wrong. What are they doing to my child? When I grew up in St. Louis, Armstrong, the default position for my parents was, the child is out of hand. Let me go talk to the police and find out what my kid did. But now the default position in 2025 is, my child is an angel. So if the police is having an encounter with them, it must be the legacy of slavery, racism, Donald Trump, authoritarian, all that foolishness, as opposed to you being responsible for your kid, and don't default that your kid has done nothing wrong.
So let me just say this as we wrap up. I think Michael said something, and as a law enforcement, I want you to get a response, because I had not really thought about it. He's saying that without the National Guard present side by side in any place, whether it's Washington, D.C., you're not going to get this crime under control. You agree?
That we will not get this crime under control. I agree. I agree. It takes a force of presence to get this crime immediately under control. Is it a sustainable solution? As Michael said, no, it's not. However, you have to meet it where it is. And right now we're in the extreme. We have to go to the extreme, Armstrong.
So do you think eventually Chicago and everybody else will be on board because they're not going to be able to contain this crime? It's going to get worse instead of getting better, Michael?
I would agree, because the American people deserve better. They deserve to be safe, and they're not going to tolerate it much longer. They're tired of the rhetoric. They're kind of saying, okay, you did the rhetoric, it didn't work. This is working. You either find something better or we're bringing it in, and they're going to override their elected officials at some point in time. They've had enough.
Oh, I agree. Look, Scott, Michael, Raynard, Marcus, thank you so much for this common sense, rude awakening conversation, okay? It's a rude awakening. We'll be back with Rebecca Rommney right here in the studio. Don't go away.
It is easier to build up strong children than to try and repair broken men.
The streets are plagued with crime, violence. There's a lot of poverty, and it's all a result of lack of education that's happening in our schools. So it really is a crisis.
We come from very different political perspectives, but we've come to the same conclusion, and that is there is a crisis in the classroom. Children are being deprived of quality of life because they're being deprived of a good education. We must solve this problem. It's incumbent upon all of us to join hands together to get this done.
We can't afford to wait one more day before we address these issues, because every day we lose another child.
Let's stop the politicking. Let's stop the games. Let's really do something to give these kids a real chance at life and being a part of that American dream.
We need accountability for funding. Many of the districts where you're seeing very low test scores, students graduating with very low literacy and math comprehension rates, they are receiving a lot of funding. So where is the money going where our kids aren't being adequately educated?
If you believe every child is deserving of a quality education, please go to educationjusticefoundation.com. And welcome back to the broadcast. Before we turn to literature and history, I want to share something personal. We just returned from Alaska, where we had the chance to witness the breathtaking majesty of its glaciers. And everybody's talking about the glaciers are melting, we're in trouble, but they also remind us of the power and beauty of nature and why we must cherish and protect this. Let's take a moment to experience the magnificence of Alaska's glaciers together.
We're sailing through Endicott Arm, a breathtaking fjord carved by ancient ice over thousands of years. Towering cliffs rise on either side, waterfalls tumble into the sea, and at the end of this 30-mile passage, one of Alaska's great natural wonders comes into view, Dawes Glacier. Dawes Glacier is a tidal glacier, meaning it flows directly into the ocean. This river of ice stretches nearly 600 feet tall at its face, and behind the surface, it extends for miles back into the mountains. The ice itself can be hundreds, even thousands of years old. Snow that fell long before our time, compacted into solid blue ice. The glacier is constantly moving, creeping forward about 80 feet per day. Every so often, huge chunks break away in a process called calving, crashing into the water to form icebergs that float all around us. Some are the size of cars, others as big as houses, sculpted into dazzling shapes by the wind and waves. The waters here are alive with wildlife. Seals haul out of the icebergs to rest and protect their young from predators. Bald eagles soar above the cliffs, and if we're lucky, we might spot humpback whales or orcas cruising these rich glacial fjords. Endicott Arm, together with the nearby Tracy Arm, forms part of the Tongass National Forest, the largest temperate rainforest on Earth. These pristine wildlands are protected as a wilderness area, preserving a glimpse of Alaska as it has been for millennia. Dawes Glacier is both a reminder of the past and a window into the future. As the climate warms, glaciers across Alaska are retreating, but here, in this quiet fjord, the power and beauty of the ice endure, a timeless spectacle of nature at work. This is Dawes Glacier, the living heart of Endicott Arm, Alaska.
That was our new HHS correspondent, Marshall Nelson, reporting from Alaska. We thank him for that soothing package. From the power of nature to the power of words, our next guest, Rebecca Rommney, takes us on a journey into the hidden voices of women writers who helped shape literary history. Her book, Jane Austen's Bookshelf, uncovers these forgotten stories, and we're delighted to have her with us. Rebecca, welcome to the broadcast. What inspired you to write about Jane Austen's Bookshelf and uncover the voices of women writers over history that is often overlooked?
This year marks the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth, so I felt like it was a perfect opportunity to look at her legacy and question why we have turned her into one of the greatest writers in English, and look at the culture of her time and how she was inspired, because no genius works in a vacuum. They are pulling out material from around them, and in fact, Austen had many, many models of particularly women writers who we don't know much about today. So I, in fact, started collecting the works of these authors because that was my question, is why were they so popular in their own lifetime that they were Jane Austen's favorite writers, but we don't know them anymore, we only know Jane Austen.
Well, what do you think is that so many women who helped shape our culture were forgotten over time?
There are all sorts of factors at play here. So first of all, we tend to focus on one major figure, and that hurts the other figures. So we have Jane Austen, we don't need any others. We all have a limited amount of time to read. We can't read every single book. That's what the canon is for. It says these are books from past generations that are still relevant to us today, and we guarantee that they are high quality. And so we chose and anointed Jane Austen as that writer. But what I found when I was digging into Austen is Austen died incredibly young, tragically young. She died at the age of 41, which means she only completed 6 novels. And so if you're a big Jane Austen fan like me, you have those 6 novels and that's it. And if you want to read more, you can't. You can reread Austen, but that's it. And it took me a while to realize, no, I can in fact read novels very like Jane Austen's by the women that she was reading.
How does rediscovering these writers change the way we understand literary history?
We tend to flatten history into black and white narratives. We tend to make it about big events and big people. But in fact, history is very much like the present, which is to say there are a lot of complicated factors, and humans have many different facets and a lot of richness. And so when you dig back into that period and let it speak genuinely through the primary sources of the era, it provides a richer perspective on that period and helps us better interpret that moving forward for today.
Take us back to Jane Austen and what you discovered about her that resonated so with you, and take us back to the period that she was writing about and what she brought to life through the words and the power of putting this pen to paper, and also discovered other voices that also covered so many important periods in our history.
What I love about Jane Austen is that she was able to take the lives of ordinary women and make them feel extraordinary. And I think that today that is a big part of why her works still feel incredibly fresh and relevant to us. But in fact, in her own lifetime, this was one of the main reasons why she wasn't as popular as some of her compatriots who were writing about bigger stakes. So you think about Milton or Shakespeare, they're talking life and death, tragedy, and you know, does it end with murder? Does it end? Is it warfare? Is it the retelling of stories from the Bible? It's very extreme because that was what the view was of what high art was. And Austen focused on the ordinary, on realism. And that was something that didn't get to be fully appreciated until later in the 19th century. So over time, Austen's influence and Austen's ability to be reread was shaped largely by our own changing tastes, where we wanted to see ordinary people finding their happy endings rather than the dramatic deaths and feuds of, say, royalty that we get in Shakespeare.
You know, I think if I go back and think about one of my favorite Jane Austen books, it would probably be Sense and Sensibility. And she also wrote the book Emma, which I'm sure resonated with you.
I wonder why I say that, Armstrong.
I'm pretty sure it did. Am I wrong?
You were not wrong.
I'm not wrong, but go ahead. Sense and Sensibility was, I thought it was one of her finest works, actually.
Sense and Sensibility was the first book that Jane Austen got published, in fact. Yeah. She had been working to get published for about a decade before that, and she wasn't having much success. She did sell one book to a publisher, but then that publisher didn't bring the book out, which was incredibly frustrating for her. Sense and Sensibility was the first time that Austen's work was in print, but not her name, because she published Sense and Sensibility anonymously.
Pseudo.
It was just said by a lady on the title page.
What does it tell also, I think I'm coming up on a break here, but anyhow, you don't think we're calling this cultural silencing of women, do you?
I think it's much more complicated than that.
It is much deeper.
Yes. If it were just as simple as that, I wouldn't have written a book about it. I could have, blasted that off on social media and moved on. In fact, it's much more complicated, and that's what makes it much more interesting, because it gets into questions of why do we do reprints, who gets to determine what's read, how books are produced in the first place, and how the circumstances of production affect the actual texts.
You know, before we say goodbye to you, how does someone go out and get a copy of your book? And I'm so proud to have you on, because I bought many books from you, including the Gutenberg Bible, which I'm so proud of, Up From Slavery, Booker T. Washington, and you're just a wonderful curator of books. How does someone go out and get a copy of your work?
My book is published by Simon & Schuster, so you can find it in any bookstore, you can find it on Amazon, check your local independent bookstores, or your local public library.
And I can certainly vouch for Ms. Rebecca Rommney on any day. Thank you so much for joining us, coming on to talk about your book, and thank you so much for writing this book. We'll be back. I'm Armstrong Williams. Why is it I'm not hearing anything?
As a home buyer, you need a lender who cares about your home ownership dreams. United Security Financial has been helping families secure their dream homes for 30 years. We're a national fair practice lender that provides affordable mortgages and low down payment programs to eligible home buyers. To learn how United Security Financial can help you secure your dream home, call 1-800-373-4186.
Now, Hilary, the last time you were on this show, the president tweeted it out. So I don't know what's going to happen now, but we do know, and it's a great tribute to the staff here at WGLH, because they do such a fantastic job, to know that the president of the United States find our show, not only that he's watching it, but he finds it so credible. But you know what? It's fascinating, because I didn't get so much caught up in the fact that the president was watching the show, while I was very humbled and flattered by that, is what you said about Russia. He seems to say you were spot on your insights about foreign policy. And what we're seeing that's happening in China with the Shanghai Organization Conference, and the fact that Trump tweeted out, this is sort of anti-America, you're pointing out America. What are we to make of Putin, Kim Jong-il, Xi Jinping, all getting together from that meeting this week?
Well, a couple of things there. Might I just make mention, since you thanked your staff, they are all so warm and welcoming. I really appreciate that. And I go to a lot of places, and your staff are very special. But if I could just say this with regard to every conflict, look at history. History repeats itself. You've got to think about, what do they want? Everything in life is about what they want. Do they want to look like losers? This is what I said last time, and President Trump agreed. No man has ever raised their hand and said, I want to look like a loser. No man wants to say, no, actually humiliate me, make me look like a loser in front of my people. They are trying to unite because they need to become stronger. Putin is not winning the war. He's not winning it on the global stage. He's not winning it diplomatically. He's not winning it militarily. So he is now trying to get the rest of the world to join forces with him on his side. So, because what he craves is obviously power.
And if the president of China has so much influence and so much power and force, why didn't he get Putin to stop the war with Ukraine? Why? And all of a sudden, he wants to be a peacemaker.
Yeah, no, he's looking at his own self-interest too. Everything is about their own self-interest. That's what it's about. And don't forget, what's funding this Russian war? It's the Russian oil that they're sending to India. And also, don't forget, the Chinese have been trying to, with their Belt and Road policies, they've been trying to dominate Europe and Africa for many, many, many years. That was not a pro-American policy. Their big time picture, their big global picture, and they think in not just years and decades, they think in thousands of years. They want to be the global dominating force.
What about Putin inviting Zelensky to Moscow?
Well, that's because, well, part of it is a power play. Come to my place. I'm not coming to you. Again, going back to what do men look like, no man raises his hand and says, I want to look like a little loser. So he wants him to come to him. That's a power play right there. And like I said last time, remember this, Putin definitely, these are the definites, he doesn't care about people. He sent 20,000 of his own men, young Russian men, to die in the month of July. So he doesn't care about people. He cares about how he looks on the world stage, and he cares about success, and he cares about the future of Russia only for one thing. How does his name go down in history, and how does it reflect on him? So why is he inviting Zelensky to Moscow? Because he wants to be the power player, and he wants to look like the one that if there is peace, it's due to him, not President Trump.
So with conflicts raging in Ukraine and the Middle East and Africa, are we seeing the United States proven ineffective or irrelevant?
No. I think that President Trump has been the only person to initiate this and to actually start to convene people. No other American president has. What they're trying to do is they're actually, again, jealous of what President Trump did. They all want to look like the power players. That's why they're getting together.
But are we getting the value?
Remember, it's not one of them. It's not one of them. They're all trying to unite. It takes all of them uniting to equal Trump.
That is a fact. But are we getting the value from all the billions that we're spending and with the United Nations? Are we getting a return on our money? And how are China and India using their influence to reshape global power dynamics, and especially here at the UN and beyond?
Well, at the UN, all I can say is, as an American taxpayer, all Americans should be asking, we spend $3.2 billion every year, what exactly are they doing? What are the staff they're doing? I'd really love to know that. I'm not saying that the UN wasn't a good concept. I think it was a wonderful concept. I think when it was established, I believe it was by Woodrow Wilson, it was established to try and keep world peace. Look what's happening in the Ukraine. Look what's happened in the Middle East. Look what's happened now how Taiwan is threatened. What is the UN doing? Everybody should have to account for their jobs. You only keep your job if you're effective. That's the question. And I think the American taxpayer should be asking, and I think all of our leaders should be asking that question. It's a very good question.
But should America rethink its role in funding global institutions that sometimes appear hostile to our interests?
Yes, of course, like the World Health Organization, exactly the same thing, imposing things on us that we know now about COVID. The countries that didn't totally shut down, the countries that were more sensible, like Sweden, they had all of their retirees stay at home. They had everyone with a weak immune system stay at home, but they managed it differently, and we had the World Health Organization dictating to us. So absolutely do agree. Global institutions aren't necessarily out. They're certainly not putting America first.
You had 7 candidates running for Germany elections to die. Is that a conspiracy? Die all at once? Should there not be a deeper investigation into that?
Yes, very much so.
What are you hearing?
Very much so. I think it's beyond suspicious, and it's also like some of the things here where we've had certain politicians where there are circles of people around them that have died suspiciously. Yes.
And why were they so threatened? Because they realized that mass immigration in Europe is a threat to Europe?
It is a threat to Europe. And again, it's an invasion. And what I always say about the invasion of Europe, like the small boats going to the UK, what I always say is the UK thwarted, under Churchill, thwarted the German invasion. Could you imagine now saying to Nazis, not only come on in little dinghies and boats, but also, in addition to coming in, we'll give you a free 4-star hotel, we'll give you free meals, we'll give you videos and PlayStations in your room, and we'll also give you a free mobile phone, cell phone. We wouldn't have done that. So yes, it's completely the antithesis of what Europe should stand for, which is a cultural norm and a culture in each individual country. The problem with Europe, and I've mentioned this before, the problem with Europe is there is no one place. I remember sharing with you that, Henry Kissinger said, I'll believe in a Europe when I have one phone number to call. There are 27 nations with 27 diverse objectives.
Let me tell you a game changer this week. Those 11 narcotic terrorists that were coming across on international waters, they were not arrested. They were all blown to tithers. What message does that send? I knew Rubio met with the president of Mexico. They seemed to calm this. But Trump said he wanted to send them a message. You're not killing our people anymore by fentanyl in your drugs.
No, I think that's the message. And again, talking about, anybody, a naughty child that is allowed to continue to be naughty will always be naughty. If you let people get away with things, they will always continue to do it. You have to absolutely put your foot down, and that is putting your foot down. And law and order means we have laws in this country. We welcome immigrants. I'm an immigrant, but my family came legally. And tying this to politics and why President Trump's in office, I think a huge miscalculation in this country and across the world is legal immigrants like me, like my family, we feel even more strongly, I think, than Americans that are born here, that we went through the whole process. We know what it took financially, we know what it took logistically, we know what we did ethically, and so all the immigrants in America who come from immigrant families, and there's a lot of us, we feel more strongly that you should, if you're going to come to America, do it the right proper way.
You know, are we, Hilary, entering a world or regional blocks rather than one of global cooperation?
Well, yes. And we have done, and you've seen that shift over the years. I remember one thing, actually I watched, and you might gather, I watched a lot of history with my children when they were younger. I'm somewhat of a history buff, and/or I really don't I always call it rubbish. I don't watch rubbish. So teaching my children and having them watch years ago the History Channel, when it used to be called the Hitler Network or the Nazi Network, it's not so much more history anymore, but they have ice road truckers. My youngest son, my son said to me, he said to me one time, he was all confused, and he said, "Mommy, when do the adults know when to change sides?" Because he knew that we were now friendly terms with Japan, but he was seeing all these war movies where Japan was the enemy. And it's a good question from a child. When do the adults know when to change sides? And they certainly do change sides. Italy changed sides. Germany has changed sides. Japan has changed sides.
It's history.
Yes.
What can we expect from Modi? We understand the 50% tariff because he's part of the oil supply to Russia.
Correct.
How they're getting paid.
Correct. He's been buying it. He's been buying it from Russia and refining it. Yes, and funding the war.
What is Trump's next move with Modi?
I am really actually surprised that the relationship has deteriorated between Trump and Modi. Yeah, I think all of us are.
Yeah, sure.
I think if it was an easy answer, someone would have it. I'm never going to pretend to know an answer when I don't have one. I think he's turning and he's pivoting, and that's why he's pivoting to the other side.
What does it mean for us, though, in the long run?
I don't like the way the world is going in terms of the alliances that are being formed and the meetings without us, but you can't stop people doing what they want to do. They're going to do what they want to do. The only thing you can do is to hope and try, which I think what President Trump, the president of peace, is doing, is to try to give them what they want while maintaining peace, and that's it.
In the minute left, Netanyahu in Gaza.
Yes. We all know, those hostages were taken for one reason. It is their insurance policy. Hamas is not giving up the hostages. They took hostages. They massacred Israelis. They massacred all those young people at the concert, and they went into the kibbutzes and massacred people. The instructions from Hamas were rape them, burn them, kill them. I don't know how you make a rational, sensible decision with people that do that, and their religion dictates that they rape, burn, and kill Jewish people. So the answer is they're not giving up the hostages. I think eventually the IDF is going to have to go in, and the families of the hostages don't want that.
It's not going to get it. Hilary, Fordwich, global political financial analyst, thank you always for joining us.
Absolutely, Armstrong. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Armstrong Williams. Boy,
You got the memo. We're in blue today together.
I love it. We covered a lot today.
We did. Thank you for having me, Armstrong.
See, here's the good news. Neither one of us knew that Trump was sending out this tweet.